core lifetimes and the time-space medium. A core lifetime is when the light from the universal principle penetrates the time-space membrane. If you could see it from your perspective, this membrane looks like a mirage of jello. That is the easiest way to explain it. From outside of it, it looks as if you were looking in your beautiful night sky, but you know how your mirages wobble. It wobbles like that, and its substance is like looking through clear gelatin. The core light, core lifetime, is the entity, you. When you are at that speed, you travel so fast that you cannot be held. In order to see itself, this light penetrates this membrane, this jello, this gelatin of time-space. It penetrates so fast, just like a laser beam, that it cannot stop to check out the experience. In its traveling through that membrane, it leaves a holographic imprint of its journey. It would be like burning a laser beam through a steel door. The metal is all warped and you can't see the laser beam anymore. All you can see is the path of where it went. The core life is the exact same thing. The core life, or the core light, traveled through the gelatin membrane called time-space at such a rapid rate you couldn't see it, and it left a hole or an imprint from its journey, just like the laser beam on the steel door. Now you come along and examine the door to try to figure out what made the hole, but that is what you call your lifetimes. This would be much like taking a big, thick steel door, burning a hole through it, and then sitting around analyzing every inch and every speck of the entire metal to see what made the hole. Because of the way time-space is made, this planet, your lives, are all a hologram. Everything you see. In the membrane of time-space, in the gelatin, if you used a laser beam in jello, it would melt, but it would fill back in. With light in the time-space medium, it is the same way. The core light penetrates through it at such a rapid rate that it melts it almost behind it, pulling the gelatin back in, creating a hologram of its journey and giving life to everything it passes through. The time-space medium was a membrane created out of possibilities. So whatever portion of the membrane the light penetrates will determine which portion of the membrane it gives life. The core light went through, penetrated, created a hologram, a very straight hologram. It couldn't see itself, but as it did that, it was so high-powered with love and life that it gave life to the jello around it. Each of you are taking a piece of that, calling it yourself, and dissecting where the light went through. Your lives, as it were, are the study of the paths of the light through this medium. From one perspective, it was only one light that traveled through, and it imprinted the whole thing. This is why you live all of your lifetimes in one lifetime. Or you can spend as long as you want, and thousands of them playing around trying to dissect what you are. When the light made a hole through the gelatin, the hologram, the portions of the gelatin that gave it life are like little worms trying to inspect where the light went through. It would look much like your brain systems. If you could actually watch your neurons firing in your brain system, it looks the same way. They get out and jump back in because they are not perceiving themselves to be mini lights. They jump back in to try to see the rest of the story. You are all trying to see the rest of the story. You want to see how it ends. So from one perspective, that is why we say also, you are living what has already been lived. The core light, having gone through the gelatin, lived it all because it gave life to it all. Let's look at it another way, and we'll put a different persona on time-space. Let's say that time-space is a physically manifested entity with a genetic structure. Let's say that it has a body, but it doesn't look like yours. Let's say that its body looks like a piece of gelatin, just like what we've already described, but it is a rich, fat, genetic story. That is its body. Let's say in the abstract that this entity is an entity that is a manifested entity, just like you are, that has a different body. This entity, when its body is manifested, looks like a membrane of gelatin, but it is vast and rich in genetic heritage and memory because it went through all these experiences just like you do, but they weren't in bodies quite like these. So this entity, the gelatin entity, which is what you call the time-space medium, has a body, a total genetic body. The light penetrates, like we said. As it penetrates through, it leaves a hologram of all these little life essences. Each one of these little life essences picks a different genetic memory out of the body and gives itself a face. So now, where the light penetrated the body of the gelatin entity, it ran into the vast genetics. All of these stories, all of these faces, everything it had gone through on its journey. When the light went through it, it left the hologram, or it left the path of its journey. The light and the love was so intense that it created life. It gave life to every one of the genetic structures. This is like its DNA structure around the wound where the light went through. Each of these little particles starts trying to heal the wound in the gelatin. This is its way of healing itself. If you cut yourself, your body goes to work in the same way the gelatin body starts working to heal itself. As it does this, each of these little light worms all of a sudden start seeing that they are alive, just as how most of you take your skin for granted unless you hurt it. Then you start to notice it. Each of these little particles in your strip where the core light went through is starting to play with one of the genetic memories. Since that genetic memory gives it a whole story of who it is, it now thinks it exists and is a person. In one sense, each of you are like antigens or antibodies trying to heal a larger body. Each of you think you are a person, but you are just one of these antibodies in the gelatin body. The light went through it and gave life all around it. It created a wound, so it had to start healing itself, but the wound was life-giving, so it created everything to be alive. Because you are all out of the same gelatin body and the same light that penetrated it, you could say every one of you is the same person on this planet. Every one of you, in a very legitimate way, is a face of each other. So which one of you is the real you depends on which day of the week it is and whether you like you or you like somebody else better. Now, light in the larger perspective spirals. You're just on a piece of it, so it looks like it only goes straight. You assume that light does not bend and therefore does not create a spiral because you are only playing with a part of it. Light always spirals. The light went through the gelatin in a spiral motion and it is going to return. The speed, the velocity, and the intensity of the light penetrating the gelatin membrane will determine how close of a circular motion it makes. Here, you believe light is one speed, but that's because you are just playing with one piece of light, the straight part. Light has different speeds. You can see that in your different frequencies. They are also light. Light travels at different speeds, different velocities. It has different cycles. You could visualize this light like a loose spring. You could take this spring that normally would be a foot long and stretch it out 10 feet. Your mind knows what that would look like. The coils are farther apart. If they are, then each loop is going to be separated from the last one. If it isn't stretched, then each spiral of this spring is next to each other. So also, if the coils of light are tight, each time that the light comes back around, it is going to be very closely connected to the last loop. Your universe was created out of a spiral that was very tightly wrapped. One way of looking at it is that each loop became a dimensional reality. See it all as being a tight spring, with each revolution touching the next, so there are no gaps. That is how your universe here was created in a virtual no time and no space. Each loop is a dimensional reality. You stretch them apart and you assume that you are separate. If you left the spring as it was, it would be tight. If you stretch it, it would assume that each revolution of the wire is separate. Since it sees itself as separate, that's what you do. When the time-space was created for the system that you're living in, it was created by a light thought principle that was very tightly wrapped and then stretched. Each time the light penetrated the gelatin membrane, it made the next revolution and penetrated it again and again until it went through the whole membrane. That is how come you have linear time to begin with. Because the coils on the light spring are so close together, you can take this time-space gelatin after the light has gone through it and expand it, just like a regular spring. When you do, there is a gap between all of the loops, and these gaps and loops are what you are calling you, your time, and your objective space. You are merely seeing the little straight portions of the same large spiral of light separated from itself. It is like looking end to end down the top of a stretched spring. The light was trying to see itself each time it burned a hole through the gelatin. It made a very fast revolution, so it would have a chance of glimpsing the effect of the last revolution. Each of you are this light glimpsing itself down the small portion of the light that intersects the jello, glimpsing yourselves through the separation of seconds, hours, days, and geographical space. It allows you to watch your idea of yourself evolve to the finished ideal. It is evolution, and it's called manifesting, and the process is the same at whatever level of creation. All of this is a little difficult to talk about because we're talking about something that is nonlinear from a linear perspective. Let's say that the core lifetime had an ideal. That ideal is the basic thought. The thought will go first, and then the light is the following spiral. So let's say that this core entity, you, is at one end of the spiral you're about to create. First, you put out the thought or ideal. In this case, it was a finished body that you could live in on this planet, a body that could hold a full-fledged God. Immediately, the thought runs ahead of you in the time-space medium or whatever you're going to use. Light is trailing thought, so the light fills in the thought through the medium. This gelatin, you see, is an entity. It just looks different than you do. It is an entity that is so vast, so rich, that from it you can get any material, any information, anything you need. So here you are, the entity, and what you want to create is a body that will hold a full-fledged God. The thought will go first through the medium to begin to collect upon the thought what it needs to build this. It is much like going into the universal genetic pool and pulling out what you need. So the thought will go first through the universal genetic pool to collect what you are going to build this on. The light will also go at the same time. The thought does, but the thought travels so fast that the thought has already arrived at the finished idea at the same time the light is starting to spiral to create it. So if the light travels in a very tight spiral, it will be able to keep brushing against where it just last created and see on each revolution what its last step was. Then, when it reaches the thought, it has the knowledge of every step and every increment of organization it took to get the end result. Let's say that you're the entity. You've already gone through this process. You've put the thought out, the light is creating the spiral. The thought that went out first already has every piece of data you need, but it's in a pool and it hasn't been organized. The light is organizing it. You've put out the thought for the possibility you want. As you put the thought out for the possibility, it is already created. It is already done. Since it is already done, the light now will start your own spiral to create it into a manifested form.